Hey guys and girls, welcome back to another beautiful video on this beautiful channel on this beautiful day. How are you doing? I missed you all. I've been gone for about 2 months, haven't made a video. I've had a vacation and just studies and things I gotta take care of basically, and haven't been able to focus on YouTube as much as I'd want to. But yeah, I just thank you all for sticking with me, and I really appreciate it. But I thought we'll continue today on this tutorial series and go ahead and talk about functions, because it's a really important step before we get to classes and objects. Functions is like a way of kind of repeating, not having to repeat code, basically writing code that we can reuse, and just makes everything a lot easier. But I thought I'd just give you a little intro to functions. We'll make a few videos on that, and I want you to remember the last video in the series where we talked about references and stuff, because that's really important when it comes to functions. Okay, so let's just get started with what they are. So let me just kind of show you a little picture on what a function might be. So this might be a function, right? And this is a box, basically. It's just a box, and in here are a bunch of gears. Just imagine this being gears, things happening, boom, 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 something like that. This is a function that you create, anything you want in the box to do. Now you decide what the box takes in. So the box has a input, just like we do, a little mouth, right? It takes something in, and often it spits something out. It doesn't always have to. Now let me just explain this as well as I can in this image. So this might be our function. This is an input. This is a parameter. So let me just call that an input parameter is the formal word for it, and this is the output. The what should we call it? The return, whatever the function returns, right? So you give it something, and this is the actual function. In Java, it's called I don't know why I say this to you, but it's good to know, method. So for those of you who have used Java before, you'll know what it is. It's a method. But anyway, input, function, output. So what happens in this box here? Now the programmer, as the programmer, we know what happens in here. We send some data in, and the function changes that data or does something with it, or whatever it wants to do. Whatever you write the function, whatever you tell it to do, and then it spits out the resulting data most of the time. So it doesn't always have to do this. Now let me say this, that you decide what the function will take in and what it spits out. So a function is basically built like this: return type, and then after that, this is in order. So the way you write a function is the return type, the name of the function, how you would call this. So whenever you kind of call the function's name in your program, the computer will know to go ahead and utilize the function. So the function name, its ID basically, and then its input parameters, whatever, input parameters. So in this way, you understand. This is how you write a function. And there are two parts of a function. There is let me just write that here. Two parts of a function. A function head and a function body. Okay? So the head and the body are different things. And there's also something called a function prototype. And I'll talk about all these as much as I can. Now, I'll make a few videos on functions because I want you to really understand them. So this is basically the function head. All right. Now the body consists of, this is kind of the identification of the function, and the body is what the function does. So the body has often operations that happen to the input variables, and then it has a return statement. If it is what should we say, if the programmer has kind of decided, if it is defined, or whatever you want to call it, but if you decide that it should spit something out, then it has a return statement. Otherwise, it just it has operations. So before we get into programming, let me just show you an example of this function here. Now the input might be two things or one thing or a million things, it doesn't really matter. But let's say we want to input a number A and a number B. So these can be anything. These are like integers. The function's body, it's the actual function of the function of the function is to say, well, parameter A plus parameter B. Okay, that's the function. And now we want to spit that result out. So we'll write down here, return A plus B, just like that. So that's the function's operation, to return A plus B. And this will return the result of A plus B. So say A was 2 and B was 3. That will be sent in A as 2 and B as, let's just write that out, 2 and 3. What this would do would be to add those two together, make it 5, and just return it out, and the result the output would be 5. So an example of utilization of this function would be in for example, a calculator, where you have one function that adds two numbers together and spits it out. Now, the reason for having a function for this is you wouldn't have to write the A plus B several times. All you would have to do is call the function's name with the input parameters, and it will spit out the result. Now that's a really small function. Now functions can be really big, and I hope you can see that when you make a big function, you don't have to rewrite all that code every time you want to do that operation. So that's basically the use of a function, to just shorten up the code and make it reusable. Let me just see that I'm recording. So before I talk too much more, I just want to show you a quick example of a function. For example, the one we wrote, and then I want to just go ahead and end the video so we can make several videos on this topic so I don't overwhelm you. So let's make a little function here. Remember, the way you write the function is return type name input parameter s, because you don't have to have several, you can have one. Now there are two types of functions that I want to show you. Okay, there is one that has a return type and there's one that doesn't. Something that's never returns something. So let me just show you the first one first. We want to say this, that okay, I'm going to return an integer out of this function, and the function's name is going to be add two numbers, and the input parameters are going to be an integer A and an integer B. So this is our function head or header. You call it head or header. I call it header actually, but function head works as well. So this is our function head. Now the body follows this directly. It's right beneath here. Okay, so the body is symbolized by these two curly braces. Now I hope that you can see a resemblance between this and main. Can you see the resemblance here? Okay, I'll just let you think about that until the end, where we'll talk about main really shortly, just to explain how your program works. But nevertheless, let's get back here. So we have said that we need a return type here. So you can't keep a return type without typing return something. Now in this case, I'll do A plus B. Let me just show you what happens if I don't do a return type. Let me do a system pause here, because the best way to learn something is to fail, right? So the best way to learn is to fail at making a function. Now it won't really complain. Well, yes it did. Add two numbers must return a value. I hope you can see that. That's what it says here. Add two numbers must return a value. That's the error we're getting, because I have said that it needs to return a value. So we can't just leave it. I can do return 0 here, but what use is this function if I return a 0 here or a 3? This function doesn't have a use, right? We want to use this function. We want to send two numbers in here whenever we call this function, and we want it to spit out the results. So I'm just going to say A plus B. I'm going to add these two parameters together. Now all these parameters signifiers two open holes in your box, and imagine those holes only being able to fit integers, and the holes names are A and B. So whatever comes into A, whole number A, is added with whatever comes into whole number B. But this makes sure that we can only put in integers in here, and this makes sure that we only return an integer. So we know what this function does. So let me just do this. Let me do std cout add two numbers, and I'll give this two inputs. Now I'll send in a 5 here and a 7 here, and I'll do end line, a new line. Now what is this going to give us? This is going to return a number, this integer, and we'll print that out. So it gave us 12. Okay, it gave us 12. Now if I call this directly beneath, this is what I'm talking about, reusing code. Now anytime you call this function, this is a function call. Whenever you write its name and with the input parameters it expects. Now if I don't write anything else in here, it's going to complain. It's going to say, well, there are too few input parameters in here. Look here, function does not take 1 argument. It takes 2. Too few arguments in function call because I have told it to expect 2. Now I can write different numbers in here, 50, I can do 59, I can do whatever I want, and it will add those to and spit out the result of that addition. Okay, to show you, I'll do a std cout. Now this is a good rule to have. Never use cout and cin and any kind of library function in a function. You can, but it's not really good. It doesn't really, because sometimes you want to reuse a function in the future when you're making a big game or something. You're not always sure you have the library in that file or included, so you don't know if that cout will work. So it's not always good to include these things. But still, let me just do that for demonstration purposes. So I'll print out this local input variable A and B here, and I'll actually just go ahead and do this. B like that, and A like that. So then whenever this function is called, we'll have a printout. A is 5, B is 7, 12 is the result. A is 59, B is 2, 61 is the result. So this code in here is being reused every time we write this name. It's kind of like a shortcut to this function. The computer is going in here. Oh, it sees the name here. Okay, these inputs are what I expect. Okay, the programmer has written those correctly. So now I'll jump over here and I'll execute everything in here with the 2 numbers that I've got. Okay, next line. Okay, he's called those again. Let me just go ahead and jump in here with those 2 numbers that the programmer gave us and execute all the code in here. Boom, return A plus B. So what's happening here is we're getting a integer spit out here and it's being printed out. So what I could do basically is I could do int sum equals add 2 numbers, because remember this function spits out an integer, so we can store it in an integer. Let me just say 20 here, and let me say 50 here, and then we'll just do std cout on sum, and we'll do a new line here like that, and let's just print that out. A is 50, B is 20, sum is 70. See, we're not printing out the result directly, we're putting it into another variable, and we are actually printing out sum here. Now let me give you another example of this. For example, we have a function called add experience. So let me just go ahead and try to show you how you could do that. Well, actually, I'll save that to another video where we'll talk about reference parameters. That's important because these parameters don't always have to be just temporary ones. These can actually be references. Okay, so we'll talk about that. Just for now, all you have to know is this can be a lot more flexible. This isn't by any means the extent of the usefulness of functions. So but this is a simple example just to show you. Okay, so I promised I'd show you the empty version without the return type, and that is called void. Now anytime you type void before a function name, print result directly, int A, int B, int C. Let me just put a few more parameters in here. You can put as many as you want. Now print result has the return type void, int A, B, and C as input parameters, and the name is print result. Now I told you don't use cout in functions, but in this case I'll do it as well, just to show you what I mean by not having to return and spit out something. So what happens here is I'm just going to print out, I'm going to make an integer here called sum. It's a local integer to this function. It will be destroyed as soon as it hits this little curly brace whenever the function is called. So it's not a global variable by any means. I think we talked about scope. If we didn't, we'll talk about it later. You don't have to worry about it. Sum is still initialized to 0. So there's, well, what we could do is we can actually b plus c. That's what we can do right there. So this integer, local variable in this function, is now a plus b plus c. These three variables, the sum of all of these. So I'm just going to print out sum in here. Now you're like, where is the return statement? Well, like I said, when you have void in front of a name, a function name, you're saying, okay, the computer will not expect or doesn't want this function to return anything. It just wants it to do stuff and then exit. In this case, it expects it to return something, so it won't let you get out of the function without returning something. That's why it complains. But this function is void, so it doesn't have to. So let me just go ahead down here and let me just call it, because we're doing the cout in the actual result. So all I have to do is print result with 3 numbers, 1, 4, and maybe 8, like that. That's all I have to do. I call a name with the 3 parameters it expects with anything I want, and it will execute this code with those numbers in it. Excuse me. There we go. So let's just do that, and what we get is sum is 13. All right. So it went in here, added those 3 numbers together, and printed it out. There you go. And I could do another print result directly after this with different numbers, 40, something like that, and it would do the same thing. We use the code in here. 58 is the sum. So that's basically the 2 different types of basic functions that you can make: return type and one without it. I want to show you one more example before I go, and that is to actually do this. Int a equals 20, int b equals 30. And I'm going to use this add 2 numbers function. Int c, let me just c equals 40. There we go. So I'm going to use the add 2 numbers function by sending in not constant variables like this, literals. These are called literals, if you remember from the old videos, the previous ones. These are literals. Now I'm going to send in actual variables in here. So I'm going to send in a, and I'm going to send in b. A and b. These can be anything. A something. A, they don't have to be a and b just because these 2 are a and b. It doesn't have to be that way. These are just placeholder names. You don't have to even think about that. You don't even need names here. Okay. But, well, you do need names there. I'm sorry. But still, in theory, all the function needs to know is what type it is. The a and the b are for ease of use here to just print it out and to use those. But nevertheless, we're going to send in these functions. We can call them a1 and b1 and c1, whatever, just to make a difference. So let's just print that out. And then we get 50, right? 20 plus 30 is 50. That's what we get. A is 20 and b is 30. Now, see how I'm using variables and not just some numbers? So this can be really useful later on when you want to put stuff in here that are variables from before and just use them and do stuff with them. And the same thing for print result. We'll just copy that and say a1, b1, and c1. Now let's just print that out, and that should be 50 plus 40, 90. Sum is 90. So those are the ways you can use these functions. There is one important thing you need to know is if I say a equals 20 or equals 200, maybe b equals minus 2 and c equals 50 here, or it is already something like that, 60, 70, something like that, whatever you want. This will not affect these real variables out here, because see how we're sending them in here, but that doesn't mean that they are actually connected to these local variables. It's just that these variables get a copy of the value of these variables. Okay, they just get a copy of the value. Now, what we'll talk about in the next video with reference parameters, this will actually change whatever is out here. So that's what we're going to be talking about, and I'll show you a few examples later. But for now, just know that this will not work. This will only work within the confines of this function. So if I did this after down here, we would use these values. But that does not mean that these three values will get this data. So don't just remember that. I know it might be a little confusing, but just try to remember that this will not change whatever is sent in. But in the next video, we'll talk about that. Anywho, let me just end the video, like I said, by talking about main. Now, I hope by now you see the resemblance of a return type, a name, and parameters. Now, this list can be empty. It doesn't have to really do anything. Okay, I can keep it empty, and I can do stuff in here, but then I don't have any in parameters. Let me just show you that quickly. Let's see. Void hello empty parameter list, no return statement, std cout, whoops, cout hello world from function, new line. So this function doesn't have any in parameters, doesn't return anything, it just does something. Whatever code is in here will be executed, right? So I'll say hello, just like that, and you still have to give these empty parameters. Even if you don't have any parameters to send in, you have to give it the empty parameters, because that signifies to the compiler, the computer, that we're calling a function. We're not calling a variable hello, we're calling a function with the name hello. So that's what these parentheses signify. Okay, so let me just do this, run this, and we'll get hello world from function in the bottom here. So it just used this code, and it had empty parameter list. And so now you can see that int main is a function. So this is your main function. Your program runs here, your computer, your processor, everything, it calls this main function to start to run your program, and returns, whenever main returns 0, it signifies to your computer, it tells the process to end. This exits the program because your main function ends. If your print result function or your add two numbers function ends, nothing happens, we continue. But when your main function ends, which is called by your computer, just like this, in a way, then when that function ends, this exits the whole program, the process turns off. Okay, and your computer keeps running, maybe back to the operating system, whatever. So this exits your program. So main is also a function, just like everything else, and it can return different values depending on how it wants to exit, with success, with failure, whatever. There are different types: exit success, exit failure, and you can see that there is a 0 next to success, and there is a minus, or there's a 1 in front of failure. So if I return 1, that would signify a exit failure. Something wrong happened. If I tell it 0, something correct happened. So whenever the program crashes, it returns with 1, and it exits with fail. So exit success. If I just write that there instead, return exit success, which is a 0. Obviously, if we're at the end of main, we exit with a success, right? The program ran correctly all the way to the end. But if it crashed somewhere in the middle, the computer will, the main function will return a failure. So just remember that. I know it's a little confusing, but just remember this is a function anyway. Babble on too long. Thank you for watching today. I hope you learned something. I hope you take care. I hope you keep experimenting with functions, play around with them. We'll talk about reference parameters in the next video. All right, take care, and I'll see you guys and girls in the next one. All right, bye-bye.